A terrified, powerful politician runs 20 miles uphill to beg a peasant for his son's life. The peasant doesn't move a muscle, says 5 words, and the boy is cured.
Right, yeah. It's an incredible image.
It is. And for, 2,000 years, people have read that story and focused entirely on the miracle, the magic of it. But what if I told you the real miracle, the actual hidden machinery of the story, isn't just in what the peasant did, but in the exact microscopic tense of the Greek verbs used to describe it? I mean, have you ever read a famous historical account or like a classic text and just known fundamentally that you were missing the hidden math beneath the surface?
Oh, absolutely. It is exactly like standing on the deck of a ship. You can look out and appreciate the waves, the weather, the general direction of the current, but there is a massive, complex, interlocking ecosystem operating down in the dark, miles beneath you, that you simply do not have the equipment to see.
Right. And today, welcome to the deep dive, because we are handing you the scuba gear. We are taking a single ancient 9-verse story and putting it under the most intense linguistic microscope imaginable.
Yeah, and this isn't just a casual reading. We are looking at a first-century text, specifically the Gospel of John, chapter 4, verses 46 through 54.
For anyone who doesn't have the New Testament memorized, this is the narrative of Jesus healing a royal official's son at a distance. It's incredibly short, just 9 verses. You could read the English translation aloud in maybe 45 seconds.
Easily, yeah.
But our source material today is going to take us hours to unpack. We are pulling from a comprehensive 24-module academic exegetical analysis of this exact specific passage. I mean, 24 modules on 9 verses.
The rigor of this source is honestly astounding. It takes this tiny block of Greek text and runs it through an absolute gauntlet of academic disciplines. We're talking textual criticism, verbal aspect theory, discourse analysis, systemic functional linguistics, and socioscientific criticism.
Okay, let's unpack this, because systemic functional linguistics sounds incredibly intimidating.
It's a mouthful, for sure.
It sounds like something you need a PhD just to pronounce. But our mission for this deep dive is actually thrilling. We are going to explore how focusing on the cold, hard mechanics of the language completely changes our understanding of the story.
Exactly.
We aren't just looking at the characters and the plot. We're going to look at the invisible architectural framework of the Greek grammar itself to see how the author engineered this narrative to make you, the listener, feel the sheer, unstoppable power of a single spoken word.
That's the perfect way to phrase it, honestly. It is literary engineering. The author is, manipulating sentence structure and verb tense to guide your brain exactly where he wants it to go.
But before we get into the molecular level of the grammar, we need to establish the baseline. We need to know what the building looks like before we inspect the foundation. So let's briefly summarize the plot of this story so everyone is on the same page.
Good idea. So the setting is crucial. Jesus has just returned to Cana of Galilee. And this is a callback. It's the exact location where he famously turned water into wine earlier in the gospel.
Right, so there's already a reputation established. People know who he is, or at least they know what he supposedly did there.
Exactly. The rumor mill is already churning. Now enter our secondary main character. He's a Herodian royal official. This is a man of significant political, financial, and social standing. He is likely a courtier serving under the tetrarch Herod Antipas.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he has traveled from his home in Capernaum all the way up to Cana.
Which our source points out is a journey of about 20 miles. And it's not a flat 20 miles. I mean, Capernaum is down by the Sea of Galilee, which is actually below sea level. Cana's up in the hill country. So this guy is hiking uphill for a day.
Right, and he's a wealthy elite, not a peasant used to walking everywhere.
Exactly. He is doing this because he is desperate. His son is on the brink of death back in Capernaum.
So the official finds Jesus and pleads with him, and the request is specific. He asks Jesus to come down to Capernaum to heal the boy, but Jesus's initial response is, frankly, jarring.
Yeah, jarring is a good word for it.
He offers this generalizing, almost dismissive critique to the man in the crowd, saying, "Unless you people see signs and wonders, you will never believe."
Wait, I have to stop you right there, because I've always struggled with this part of the story. Why would Jesus be so harsh to a terrified dad? I mean, the guy just walked 20 miles uphill, his kid is dying, and Jesus basically hits him with a theological lecture about people wanting magic tricks. That feels completely out of character.
It really does seem that way at first glance.
Does the grammar or the historical context actually explain why he's acting like that?
It absolutely does, and we will get heavily into the power dynamics of that exact exchange when we look at the discourse analysis later. But for now, just notice the official's reaction. He doesn't take the bait.
Right, he ignores the lecture.
Exactly. He doesn't argue theology at all. He just bypasses the critique and pleads again, saying, "Sir, come down before my child dies."
It's the ultimate parent move. I don't care about your philosophy, just save my kid.
Totally. And this is the pivot of the narrative right here. Jesus doesn't go with him. He doesn't agree to the terms of the request. He simply looks at the man and says, "Go, your son lives."
5 words in English. I mean, no magic words, no rituals, no laying on of hands, no physical touch whatsoever. Just go, your son lives.
And the text tells us the official believed the word Jesus spoke to him and just headed home.
That's incredible trust.
It is. So the next day, while he's still on the road, his servants meet him. They bring the news that his boy is alive and the fever has begun. The official asks exactly what time the fever left him.
And the servants say, yesterday, at the 7th hour, which, as the official realizes, was the exact moment Jesus spoke the words.
Right. And the story concludes by telling us that the official and his entire household believed, and this is cataloged as the second sign Jesus performed after coming from Judea to Galilee.
So that is the surface of the ocean. That is the basic plot you get from a Sunday school reading. But to get to the depths, to understand how this story was engineered, we have to start with the foundation.
We do. In serious academic exegetical analysis, before you can start dissecting the grammar of an ancient document, you have to ensure the text itself is actually solid.
Right, because we don't have the original piece of papyrus that the author John actually wrote on. That's long gone. What we have are thousands of ancient manuscript copies scattered across centuries and continents. So how do we even know we are analyzing the right words?
That's the million-dollar question.
Like, if we're going to base our theories on a single verb tense, how do we know some monk in the 4th century didn't just misspell that verb?
It's a critical question. Our source material relies on what scholars call the NA28, or the UBS-5 Greek text.
Okay, let's demystify those acronyms for a second.
Sure. NA stands for Nestle-Aland, which is currently in its 28th edition. UBS stands for United Bible Societies, currently in its 5th edition. These are the standard, critically established scholarly editions of the Greek New Testament.
Meaning they are kind of the gold standard for academics.
Exactly. What teams of scholars do is gather all those thousands of ancient manuscripts. I mean, papyrus fragments from Egypt, vellum codices from monasteries in Greece, translations into ancient Syriac and Latin, and they rigorously compare every single letter of every single word to reconstruct the most accurate original text possible.
So when they run this specific 9-verse story through that massive comparison machine, are there differences? Do these ancient copies disagree on what actually happened?
What's fascinating here is, well, there are a few textual variants across the manuscripts, but they are incredibly minor. Our source evaluates them one by one. For example, in verse 46, some later manuscripts commit the little Greek prepositional phrase, is 10 before Cana.
Okay, what does that actually mean for the translation?
It basically changes the sentence from he came into Cana to he came to Cana.
Okay, stop the presses. Into Cana versus to Cana. I think my faith can survive that discrepancy.
Right, yeah. It's microscopic. Another example, in verse 53, a couple of very old manuscripts omit the explicit name Jesus, just leaving the pronoun he.
So it reads the word which he spoke instead of the word which Jesus spoke.
Exactly. And there's also a debate in the manuscripts over a tiny particle word, de, which is just a connective conjunction like now or then.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate for a second. Even if they are minor, how do scholars actually decide which version is the original? Like if you have 50 manuscripts that say Jesus and 5 that say he, do you just go with majority rule?
Not at all. Majority rule is actually a terrible way to do textual criticism.
Really?
Because what if a scribe in the Byzantine Empire made a mistake, and then 1,000 subsequent scribes copied his mistake? You'd have 1,000 copies of a typo. Instead, scholars use a specific set of criteria. One of the most important rules of thumb is called lectio brevior, which is Latin for the shorter reading.
Right, the shorter reading is usually the original. Why would that be?
Think about human psychology. Imagine you are a scribe in the year 300 AD. You are copying this text by hand, probably by candlelight. You read the sentence, the official believed the word which he spoke. Your instinct as a helpful human being is to think, well, I want to make sure my readers know exactly who he is. I'll just write Jesus instead.
Oh, wow.
Scribes were far more likely to intentionally add a clarifying word than they were to accidentally delete a vital noun.
That makes total sense. It's like a game of telephone where people keep adding little explanatory details to the story to make it sound better or clearer. So the version that is slightly clunkier or shorter is probably the older, more raw version?
Exactly. They also apply a criterion called Alexandrian priority. This means manuscripts originating from the Alexandria region in Egypt are generally considered older and highly reliable.
Because of the environment.
Right. The dry, arid climate of Egypt preserved papyrus much better than the humid climate of Europe, so we have incredibly ancient fragments from there.
So applying these rules, like checking the shorter reading, checking the Alexandrian papyri, what is the ultimate conclusion of our 24-module source regarding this passage?
The conclusion is that none of these textual variants change the meaning, the syntax, or the discourse structure of the story in the slightest. The text we have is remarkably historically stable.
Okay, so this process, it's literally like inspecting the foundation of a house before you start critiquing the interior design. We have to know the floor isn't going to cave in when we put weight on it. And what the source is proving is that we have a solid, stable block of ancient text to work with. There are no missing load-bearing walls.
Precisely. The text is secure. Which means we can now graduate from the foundation to the really exciting part, which is looking at how the author built the timeline, the pacing, and the emotional tension of the story using the engine of Greek verbs.
Yes, this is the part I've been waiting for. Section 2 of our deep dive, which is verbal aspect. Our force relies heavily on a linguistic framework called Constantine Campbell's two-aspect model of Greek verbs. Now, if you were listening to this and you barely remember English grammar from high school, stick with us.
Yeah.
I promise this isn't going to be a boring grammar lesson.
Not at all.
Because understanding this fundamentally changes how you experience an ancient story.
It really does. To understand it, we have to contrast it with English. In English, we usually think of verbs strictly in terms of time. Past, present, future, I ran, I run, I will run. The time the action happened is the most important piece of information to us.
Right.
But in ancient Greek, while time is definitely a factor, the verb system is driven far more by something called aspect.
Aspect. Okay, how's that different from time?
Aspect is about how the author wants you, the reader, to view the action. It's about perspective. And Campbell's model breaks this down into two main categories: perfective aspect and imperfective aspect.
Got perfective and imperfective. Walk me through them. Let's start with perfective.
Let's start with the perfective aspect. In Greek, this is usually communicated through what's called the aorist tense. When an author uses a perfective verb, they are presenting the action as a complete, bounded whole. It's like a summary from the outside.
Give me an English equivalent so I can wrap my head around it.
Sure. Think of the sentence, I walked to the store. It's a simple, bounded action. You are looking at the event as a completed package. You aren't focusing on the mechanics of putting one foot in front of the other. You're just stating the fact of the journey. In our story, Greek verbs like elphin, which means he came, apelphin, he went, and pistison, he believed, are all aorist. They are perfective.
And the source points out that these perfective verbs form the main line of the narrative. They are the structural pillars. They move the plot forward from point A to point B. He came, he went, he believed. It's the skeletal structure of the story.
Exactly. That's the main line. But then you have the opposing category, which is the imperfective aspect. This usually utilizes the imperfect and present tenses in Greek. Imperfective verbs present the action as ongoing, in progress, or as an unfolding state of being.
So it's not a closed box.
Right. You aren't looking at the action from the outside as a completed package. The author is dropping you inside the action while it's actually happening.
So using your store analogy, the perfective is, I walked to the store.
Yes.
The imperfective would be, I was walking to the store.
Yes, I was walking. It's unbounded. It leaves room for other things to happen while the walking is taking place. In the Greek text of our story, words like en, meaning he was, or astheni, he was sick, are imperfective.
And these form the background. They don't move the plot forward. They paint the scenery. They set the stage for the mainline action to occur. Okay, I want to try an analogy here to see if I have this right. Let's pretend this story is a movie being shot by a director.
Okay, I like this. Keep going.
The perfective verbs, the aorists, are the hard action cuts. The director shouts, cut to the official arriving, cut to him pleading, cut to him walking home. It's boom, 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 marching the timeline forward.
Yeah, that tracks.
But the imperfective verbs, Those are the slow panning shots. Or maybe the atmospheric background music.
Mhm.
The camera slowly pans across a dim room to a sickbed. The son was being sick. It doesn't advance the plot to the next scene. It establishes the heavy emotional environment of the current scene.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The perfective verbs are your action cuts. The imperfective verbs are your panning atmospheric shots. And a masterful director, or in this case, a masterful writer, uses both to control the audience's attention. But here is where the grammatical analysis of our 24-module source gets truly brilliant.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
There is a linguistic phenomenon in Greek called a discourse peak.
Yes, this was the ultimate aha moment for me when I was reviewing the material. Explain the discourse peak.
So, if the author has been using perfective aorist verbs to move the plot forward, all those hard action cuts you mentioned, what happens when he suddenly, violently breaks that grammatical pattern? Right at the absolute climax of the story, when the official begs for his son's life and Jesus gives his ultimate answer, the author stops using the past tense aorist verbs to introduce their speech. He switches to the present tense, lege, he says.
Wait, I want to make sure I understand this. The author is writing a story that happened in the past. But right in the middle of it, he writes Jesus says instead of Jesus said. Doesn't that break the rules of grammar?
In English, it would absolutely be considered poor grammar. It's a tense clash. But in ancient Greek, it is a highly intentional literary device called the historical present. By switching from perfective to imperfective right at the moment of dialogue, the author throws a blinding spotlight on the conversation. It forcefully breaks the aorist main line. The source calls this imperfective foregrounding.
Oh, wow. So if we go back to the movie analogy, it's like the film has been playing in standard 24 frames per second, and suddenly, right as Jesus opens his mouth, the film switches to ultra-high definition IMAX, slow motion. The grammar itself is shaking you by the shoulders and saying, pay attention to this exact moment.
Precisely. The grammatical structure itself points to the spoken word as the absolute most important part of the story. It elevates Jesus' speech act above all the physical traveling, the political background, and the historical setting.
That is incredible. The grammar is doing the theological heavy lifting.
And it gets even more specific than just the speech tags. Look at the exact word Jesus speaks regarding the son's fate. He doesn't use a future tense like he will live. He doesn't use a perfective aorist like he survived. He uses the present tense verb za, he lives.
Your son lives, present tense, imperfective.
Right. Remember, imperfective denotes an ongoing, unfolding reality. Jesus is not just predicting a future point in time survival, he is declaring a new, continuous, unbreakable state of existence. The spoken word instantly creates an ongoing reality.
Okay, that is so cool. Oh, and before we move on from verbs, I want to bring up the perfect tense verb hickey that the source mentions. This happens earlier in the story when the official first hears a report that Jesus has arrived from Judea into Galilee.
Yes, the perfect tense in Greek is fascinating. It's kind of a hybrid. It often communicates a completed past action that has ongoing present consequences.
Like saying, I have locked the door. The locking happened in the past, but the consequence, the door currently being locked, is active right now.
Exactly. So by using the perfect tense hekai, meaning has arrived, the author heightens the proximity and the sheer urgency of that inciting report. It's not just historical trivia that Jesus happened to cross the border into Galilee last week. His arrival is a present, pulsating, urgent reality for this desperate father. The grammar makes the distance between Capernaum and Cana feel electric.
Okay, so to summarize the engine of the verbs, the perfective aorist verbs are the wide action shots marching us down the timeline. The imperfective verbs are the slow background pans building the atmosphere. And the historical present tense is the extreme IMAX close-up, focusing our attention squarely on the spoken word. The verbs dictate the flow.
Beautifully summarized.
But if I'm reading a whole paragraph, how does the overarching structure of the conversation actually work? This brings us to the next massive module of our source, which is discourse analysis and systemic functional linguistics.
Yeah, discourse analysis is the study of how units of language work together beyond just a single isolated sentence. How does a paragraph function? How does a whole dialogue function? And our source notes a massive structural shift in the text from narrative discourse to dialogic discourse.
Meaning the text shifts from telling a story about a guy walking to characters talking directly to each other.
Exactly. But it's not arbitrary. The shift happens precisely at the quotative frames. A quotative frame is just the phrase that introduces speech. Jesus said to him, the official said, The story isn't just a monolithic block of text. It intentionally shifts modes. And to understand why it shifts modes, the source brings in a framework called systemic functional linguistics, or SFL.
Okay, SFL, systemic functional linguistics. We need to define this because when I first read those words in the source material, my eyes completely glazed over. What actually is this?
It's totally understandable. Most traditional grammar focuses on rules. What is a noun? What is a verb? How do they agree? Systemic functional linguistics, developed largely by a linguist named Michael Halliday, doesn't just care about the rules. It cares about language as a social tool.
Okay, a social tool.
Yeah, it asks, what is this language actually trying to do in the real world? How is it functioning to shape reality or negotiate power between people?
Okay, so it's less about diagramming sentences on a chalkboard and more about the psychology and sociology of why we choose certain words.
Exactly. And our source applies several SFL metafunctions to this 9-verse passage. The first one is the ideational analysis.
Ideational, having to do with ideas.
It looks at how language constructs reality. It asks what kinds of processes are happening in the text and who is doing them. If you map out every verb in this pericope, the ideational analysis shows that the text is completely dominated by two types of processes. First, material processes, physical actions like going, coming, healing. And second, verbal processes speaking, begging, saying.
And let me guess, the analysis shows a pattern in who gets to do what.
Precisely. In both the material and the verbal categories, Jesus is the central actor and the central sayer. He is grammatically in control of the reality of the text.
Wait, I really want to pause on this. Because if we look closely at the narrative, the miracle itself, the actual curing of the boy's fever, isn't a material process done by Jesus. Jesus doesn't do a material process to the boy. He doesn't touch him. He doesn't mix a potion. He does a verbal process. He just speaks.
Right.
So according to this linguistic analysis, does the verbal process instantly become a material reality?
That is exactly the theological point the grammar is enforcing. Jesus' word is the action. The source emphasizes that the sign, the healing of the fever, has zero independent agency. The fever doesn't just spontaneously decide to leave at 1 p.m. The healing is entirely 100% tied to the spoken word, the logos. The verbal process of Jesus creates a material reality 20 miles away.
That is mind-bending when you really think about it. Language actually altering physical matter. Okay, so that's how the text constructs reality, the ideational piece. What about the next metafunction the source explores? The interpersonal analysis.
Interpersonal analysis looks at the social dynamics embedded in the language. How are the characters relating to one another? How are they negotiating power?
This goes back to my question earlier about Jesus sounding harsh.
Exactly. Let's look at the language the royal official uses. He uses urgent vocative addresses. Sir, come down. The Greek word is kyrie, which can mean lord or sir, a term of immense respect. He is desperate, and his language is pleading, deferential, and urgent. But look at how Jesus responds to him in verse 50.
The source notes that Jesus uses positive polarity commands with zero modal softening.
Yeah, explain modal softening for us. I think we all do this every day without realizing it.
We absolutely do. Modal softening is what humans do to be polite and avoid conflict. If we are sitting at a dinner table and I want you to pass the salt, I don't look at you and bark, pass salt. That's aggressive. I use modal softening. I say, hey, could you possibly pass the salt? Or, if you don't mind, would you hand that over? I soften the command with conditional words.
Exactly. It negotiates the power dynamics so you don't sound like a dictator. But Jesus does none of that here. He doesn't say to this powerful, wealthy politician, well, I might be able to heal him. He doesn't say, could you go home and check on him? He uses an absolute, unsoftened imperative command, go, followed by an absolute declarative statement, your son lives.
It's a massive flex, which brings up an absolutely fascinating cultural context that the source dives into. To really understand this interpersonal clash, we have to look at the socio-scientific criticism regarding patron-client dynamics in the first-century Mediterranean world.
This is the key to unlocking the whole interaction. First-century Judea and Galilee operated on a strict social web of patrons and clients. It was an honor and shame culture. The royal official is a Herodian elite. He has money, he has political status, he has power. In almost any other situation, he is the patron.
Right. People come to him for favors.
But his son is dying, and his money can't fix it. So he travels to Cana and approaches Jesus, who is socially the peasant, an itinerant rabbi, and the official acts as a client begging a massive life-saving favor from a patron. The cultural expectation is that if the patron grants the favor, the client is forever in his debt, owing him public loyalty and honor.
Right, but here's where it gets really interesting. We have to look at the deep irony of the official's request. The official begs Jesus to physically travel. He uses the Greek imperative katabethi, come down. He is assuming that for the patron to dispense the healing favor, physical proximity is a mechanical requirement. He thinks Jesus has to be in the room standing over the bed to do the magic.
He is trying to dictate the terms of the miracle. He is the client, but he's still acting like an elite, telling the rabbi where to go. And how does Jesus respond? By flexing the ultimate divine patronal power. He completely subverts the official's expectations. He heals at a distance with a single word. He refuses to travel. He refuses proximity. His authority as a patron over life and death is so absolute that physical geography is totally irrelevant to him.
Oh, that completely reframes the earlier harsh comment.
Yeah.
When Jesus says, unless you see signs and wonders, you won't believe, he isn't just being mean to a sad dad.
Yeah.
He is challenging the man's entire worldview.
Yes, exactly.
The official is basically saying, please come to my house so you can fix this because I need to see you do it. And Jesus says, you just want to see a magic show. I don't need to go to your house to fix this. My word is enough. Now you go.
Exactly. It perfectly illustrates the superiority of Jesus. The official is wealthy and powerful, but he is reduced to a desperate petitioner who must simply obey. Jesus is technically of a lower social class, but he exercises an authority that blows the official's aristocratic worldview wide open.
Okay, this is brilliant. We see the power dynamics embedded in the dialogue. We see how the perfective and imperfective verbs act as a camera lens to focus our attention. But I still have a mechanical question.
Sure, what is it?
Reading is a linear process. You read one word after another. If an author doesn't have the benefit of bold text or italics or all caps, how does he subtly guide the reader's brain through the sentence to make sure we feel the impact of that spoken word? How does the author manipulate the flow? This brings us to section 4 of our analysis, breadcrumbs and flow. Textual and cohesion analysis.
Right. Within that systemic functional linguistics framework we discussed, textual analysis looks specifically at how information is packaged and organized on the page to guide the reader's cognitive flow. And our source does an incredibly detailed deep dive into a concept called theme-rime progression.
Theme and rime. I love this concept, but it took me a minute to grasp. Walk us through it.
It's highly effective once you see it. In linguistics, the theme is the front part of the clause. It's the starting point. It's usually the known information, the psychological subject of the sentence that anchors the reader.
Okay, the theme is the anchor at the front.
Yes. The rime, on the other hand, is the end of the clause. The rime is where the author pushes the new, punchy, important information they want to stick in your mind.
It's exactly like how a comedian structures a joke.
Oh, yeah. How so?
The setup is the theme at the front of the sentence. So a guy walks into a bar. That establishes the context. The rime is the punchline at the very end of the sentence, where the surprising new information lands. If a comedian puts the punchline in the middle of the sentence, it ruins the joke. The impact has to be at the end.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it. The rime is the punchline. And our source meticulously analyzes every single clause in these 9 verses to see how John structures his sentences. The author consistently puts the main action, the aorist verbs we talked about earlier, in the theme position at the front to anchor the story. But he pushes all the spatial details, the temporal details, the where and the when into the rime at the end of the clause.
Give us a specific example from the Greek text of how this highlights the author's theological point.
Look at the very end of the story, verse 54. It's the concluding summary of the whole event. In normal, standard Greek grammar, the verb usually comes first. But here, the Greek reads tuto de palen deuteron semeion, which translates literally to this second sign. The author takes the object of the sentence, the sign itself, and forcefully fronts it. He yanks it out of its normal grammatical order and sticks it squarely in the theme position.
So by breaking the normal pattern, the author is screaming at the reader, this is the point of closure. The whole story was leading to this sign.
Exactly. The grammatical disruption acts like a syntactic highlighter pen. The author is manipulating the clause structure to guarantee that you leave the story thinking about the miraculous sign as a definitive attestation of Jesus' identity.
But the textual analysis of our source doesn't stop at just the structure of single clauses. It also looks at how the whole paragraph sticks together over time. This is called cohesion analysis. And I have to say, this next part is probably my favorite insight from the entire 24-module academic breakdown. The source tracks what it calls the cohesion chain, specifically tracking the identity of the royal official.
Yes, the identity chain. It is an absolute masterpiece of literary tracking and character development, all done subtly through nouns.
Okay, please methodically walk us through this. How is this guy referred to throughout these 9 verses? Because it's not just, he did this and he did that.
Not at all. When he is first introduced in verse 46, he is called tis basilikos, a certain royal official.
Okay, so his identity is purely his political title and his social status. He is defined by his power.
Right. Then, when he hears about Jesus and makes the long trek to find him, the text drops the title and refers to him simply as Hautos, this man. He's just a guy seeking help. The political armor is starting to crack.
He's on the road, he's sweaty, he's desperate.
Exactly. Then, during the actual pleading with Jesus, when he is begging him to come down, he's referred to back as ho basilikos, the official. He is tricked to leverage his status again. He is operating as the Herodian elite, begging the patron.
Right, like, do you know who I am? Please come to my house.
But then comes the massive turning point of the narrative. Jesus issues the command, go, your son lives. The next verse says, the man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him. The Greek word the author chooses there is ho anthropos.
Anthropos, the man, the human.
Yes. In the moment of pure, unadulterated faith, when he simply accepts the spoken word, he isn't a Herodian elite anymore. He isn't a royal official. He is stripped of all his worldly identifiers. He is just a human being trusting a divine word. His shared humanity is his only defining characteristic.
That is beautiful. It's like his ego is completely dissolved by faith. But the chain isn't finished there, is it?
No. He walks home. He meets his servants on the road. They tell him his son is alive. He asks what time the fever broke. They tell him it was the 7th hour, the exact moment Jesus spoke. He realizes the miracle is real. And in verse 53, the climax of his personal journey, how's he referred to?
The Father, Upetfore. The Father realized that this was the exact time. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
If you track the nouns, his identity shifts from a rigid political title to a generic man seeking help to his raw humanity in the moment of faith, and finally, it culminates in his relational joy. He's no longer the official. He's the father whose son is alive.
The linguistic chain perfectly silently mirrors his spiritual and emotional journey. You don't need a heavy-handed, omniscient narrator taking a paragraph to explain his internal psychological state. The specific nouns the author chooses to deploy do all the emotional heavy lifting.
That is just incredible. It makes me wonder how much of that I miss when I read translations that just say he over and over again to make it read smoother in English. And the source mentions other cohesion chains too, right? Similarity chains.
Yes. To keep the narrative tightly bound, there are specific thematic words that repeat like a drumbeat throughout the passage. The verb pistuo, to believe, the noun semeion sign, and that critical present tense verb za lives. Jesus says, your son lives, the servants tell him his boy lives. These repeating words act as mortar. They tie the background circumstantial clauses tightly to the aorist mainline events. They ensure the reader never loses sight of the main themes, which are belief, the sign, and life.
You know, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have just spent a massive amount of time analyzing the micro level of the grammar. We've looked at the Greek verb tenses, the clause structure, the SFL metafunctions, and the identity chains. We've been staring through a microscope. But you can't truly understand a text just by looking at its molecular structure. Eventually, you have to pull your eye away from the lens and zoom out to see the whole landscape.
That's very true.
Which brings us to the final major section of our source analysis, expanding the lens, looking at the critical, canonical, and theological synthesis.
This is where the academic source brings in what scholars call higher criticism. This involves source, form, redaction, and canonical criticism. This is about stepping back and looking at how this specific 9-verse story fits into the wider traditions of ancient Mediterranean literature and the whole biblical canon.
Let's start with form criticism. As I understand it, this is about identifying the form or the genre of a story to see what expectations the original audience would have had. You noted earlier this is a classic healing miracle form.
Yes. If you read ancient Greco-Roman literature or Jewish texts, healing stories usually follow a very predictable, formalized sequence. You get the setting, you are introduced to the problem, usually a terrible, incurable disease. The petitioner approaches the healer and makes a request. The healer performs a miracle, usually with a ritual. There is verification that the healing worked. And finally, there is a reaction of awe, fear, or belief from the crowd.
And if we look at John 4, it hits almost all those beats perfectly. Setting, Cana. Problem, son is dying in Capernaum. Request, come down and heal him. Miracle, the boy lives. Verification, the servants confirm the time. Reaction, the whole household believes. It's a textbook form.
It is. But the value of form criticism isn't just in finding the pattern, it's in looking for the departures from the norm. What makes this specific story unique against the backdrop of 100 other ancient healing myths? And the glaring uniqueness here is the total absence of physical touch or a magical token. In most ancient healing stories, the healer has to physically manipulate the sick person, or mumble an incantation, or apply a salve made of mud and spit. Here, the healing is entirely distant, and it is entirely word-based.
Jesus is almost offensively hands-off. He doesn't even break a sweat.
Exactly. It completely subverts the magical, superstitious worldview of the first century. It elevates the sheer sovereign authority of the spoken word over any physical, manipulable ritual.
Now, what about source criticism? Because this is a highly debated topic in biblical academia. The source notes that some scholars have argued this story was clumsily chopped up and pasted together from an older lost document they call the signed source. The theory is that John found an old list of miracles and awkwardly shoehorned it into his gospel.
Yes, that is a very common critical theory.
Yeah.
Some scholars look at the tension in the text, specifically the weird tension between Jesus' harsh statement about people needing signs and wonders in verse 48 and the fact that he then immediately proceeds to give them a sign. They look at that jarring transition and think, John must have smashed two different conflicting sources together here.
And honestly, if I play devil's advocate, I get that. If I'm reading a book and a character is violently opposed to doing something in one paragraph and then just does it in the next, my first thought is the author messed up, or two different drafts got stitched together in Microsoft Word. But our 24-module source pushes back on that copy-paste theory incredibly hard, doesn't it?
Very hard. And it uses all the microscopic discourse analysis we just walked through as the definitive proof. When you look at the Greek at that molecular level, the unbroken rhythmic chain of perfective aorist verbs driving the main line, the tight, perfectly logical progression of the theme rime clause structure, and especially those beautifully seamless identity chains tracking the official from official to man to father, it proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is a fiercely unified narrative.
That makes total sense. You can't have a perfectly flowing, psychologically nuanced identity chain progressing from official to man to father if you just haphazardly copy-pasted two different papyrus scraps together.
Yeah.
The grammatical flow is way too seamless. It's not a clumsy patchwork quilt. It's a single, unified literary tapestry woven by one mind.
Exactly. The source concludes that while the author Jurin may have relied on a historical oral tradition or memory, the final text we have in front of us is completely, intentionally, and masterfully structured by a single authorial hand.
Okay, let's look at canonical criticism next. Intertextuality. Does this story echo anything from the Old Testament? Because ancient Jewish writers love to hyperlink to older stories. Our source notes a possible moderate echo to the prophet Elijah.
Right. In the Old Testament book of 1 Kings, chapter 17, the great prophet Elijah raises a widow's son from the dead. And when he hands the revived boy back to his mother, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, uses the exact phrase, Zaho huiosu, your son lives.
Wait, that is the exact same word-for-word phrase Jesus uses here?
Yes, it is almost certainly an intentional literary echo. But the source makes a brilliant, vital distinction. It's an echo, but it is not a repeat, it's a contrast. Think about how Elijah heals the widow's son. He has to take the boy to an upper room, stretch his own body out over the boy 3 times, and cry out to God in desperate prayer, begging God to return the boy's life. Elijah is a mediator. He has to perform an exhausting ritual to access a power that does not belong to him.
But Jesus doesn't pray here. He doesn't stretch out. He doesn't sweat. He doesn't mediate.
John doesn't have Jesus do any prophetic ritual whatsoever. Why? To show Jesus' unique, vastly superior authority. He doesn't have to mediate the life-giving power from a higher source. He is the source of it. His bare word is enough. The echo to Elijah is planted there by the author specifically to show how much greater Jesus is than even the greatest, most legendary prophet of the Old Testament.
That is profound. He is hijacking the Elijah story to say, I am the one Elijah was praying to. Okay, let's touch on the social scientific context one more time before we wrap up. The very end of the story says that the official believed in his whole household. He believed with him. Now, to modern 21st century Western ears, that sounds a little sketchy. It sounds like forced peer pressure. Did the dad just come home, kick open the door, and say, all right, everyone, I met a rabbi. We are all followers of Jesus. Now get in line.
It's so easy to read our modern Western individualism into ancient texts. But the source takes time to explain the ancient Mediterranean concept of kinship solidarity. In that culture, the household wasn't just a collection of independent roommates who happened to share a roof and a Wi-Fi password. It was a single, organic, corporate entity.
Like a single body.
Exactly. The father, as the paterfamilias, the head of the household, was the representative for the whole. His loyalty, his honor, his religion, and his allegiances bound the entire group. It wasn't viewed as oppressive, it was survival. They were one unit. So when the Father's reality is fundamentally, miraculously altered by this encounter with Jesus, the allegiance of the household naturally and joyfully shifts with him. It's a communal dimension of faith that we, in our hyper-individualized modern world, often completely miss. The narrative is showing how one man's solitary encounter with the spoken word can literally shift the destiny of an entire community.
So what does this all mean? We've looked at Greek verbs, systemic functional linguistics, textual variants from Egypt, and ancient Mediterranean sociology. It has been a massive journey. I want to ask you to summarize the absolute core theology of this passage, based only on the grammar and the discourse analysis we've discussed today.
Yeah.
Strip away everything else. What is this text ultimately trying to teach us?
The theology, built straight out of the bedrock of the grammatical structure, is profoundly simple. It is about the nature of true faith and the absolute power of the word. The narrative moves deliberately from Jesus' generalized critique in verse 48, that frail humans always demand to see signs and wonders before they will commit to believing, to the specific example of this royal official. And what does the official do? He believes the bare logos, the naked spoken word of Jesus, before he sees a shred of proof.
He didn't see the fever break. He didn't see a flash of light in the sky. He just heard the command, go, and he went.
Right. The physical healing, the sign itself, is practically backgrounded. It happens completely off stage 20 miles away. The grammar, through the historical presence and the fronting of the clauses, places all the literary prominence, all the discourse peaks, entirely on the spoken word and the man's immediate belief in that word. The theological synthesis is that the miracle is merely an evidential pointer to the identity of Jesus as the Lord of life. True faith doesn't demand to see the magic trick performed in front of its eyes before it commits. True faith trusts the character and the authority of the speaker.
And you, listening to this right now, this is why this matters. You do not need a PhD in ancient Greek to feel the impact of this. But seeing the grammar, seeing the aorist mainlines and the historical presence, it proves to you how incredibly intentionally this story was designed by the author. It isn't just a quaint, dusty, historical anecdote about a sick kid. The structure of the text itself reaches out and asks you a direct, penetrating question. Can you trust a spoken word, a promise, even when the visible confirmation of that promise is geographically or temporally delayed?
It forces the reader to step out of the crowd and into the shoes of the official. When the crisis hits, will you demand proximity and visual proof, or will the bare word be enough for you?
Let's do a quick recap of the incredible terrain we've covered today. We started with the foundational stability of the text, proving through Lectio Breviae and Alexandrine manuscripts that these 9 verses are a secure, stable, load-bearing wall. We dug into a pile of aorist perfective verbs that marched the plot forward like action cuts in a movie, and we saw how the imperfective historical present tense acted like an IMAX camera, zooming in on Jesus' spoken command to shatter the grammatical timeline.
We saw how the author manipulated theme and rime to force the reader to focus on the finality of the sign, and we followed that masterful psychological identity chain that tracked a powerful, arrogant royal official as he was stripped down to a desperate man and finally reborn as a joyous, believing father.
We looked at the intense irony of a first-century patron-client dynamic, where the supposed patron refuses to travel to the elite client's house, but delivers the miracle anyway, completely subverting cultural expectations. We arrived at a true masterclass of literary and theological engineering. Verbal aspect and discourse analysis prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Jesus' word is the central, unstoppable force of this narrative.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this raises an important question, one that the text leaves hanging in the air for us to mull over long after we stop reading.
Lay it on us.
Notice the timeline of the official's journey. Jesus spoke the word of healing at 1 p.m. The text calls it the 7th hour, and the text explicitly tells us that the official believed the word right then and there. But he didn't find out his son was actually healed until the next day, when he finally met his servants on the road.
Oh, wow. I never actually put that timeline together.
He had a 20-mile walk back to Capernaum. And remember, it's getting late in the day. He had to walk for hours. He probably had to stop and camp overnight on the side of a dirt road. And he had to do all of that, sit in the dark for a whole night with absolutely nothing but a spoken sentence to hold on to. He had no text messages, no carrier pigeons, no proof whatsoever, just a promise. For an entire day, his reality, his peace of mind, his sanity was governed entirely by a word he couldn't yet verify.
Walking in the dark, wondering if the rabbi was crazy, wondering if his boy was dead. The anxiety must have been suffocating. But he kept walking toward home because he chose to believe the word.
What happens to us in that space, that long, terrifying walk between the promise spoken and the proof revealed? That is where faith actually lives. Faith isn't forged in the frantic moment of the request, and it isn't needed in the joyous moment of the verification. Faith lives entirely on the long, quiet, dark road in between.
That is going to stay with me for a long time. And it is exactly why we do this show. We started this deep dive talking about the feeling of skimming the surface of a familiar story, reading the words on the page but missing the depth underneath. Today, we took a microscope to 9 verses of ancient Greek, and what we found wasn't just dry, pedantic academic data. We found a brilliantly engineered narrative that reaches out across 2,000 years and speaks directly to the core human experience of waiting, of hoping, and of trusting in the dark. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep looking beneath the surface of everything you read, and remember, there's always an entire ecosystem of meaning just waiting for you to put on the scuba gear.